I'm gonna go over part 1 of Unit 1, okay? So this is Anatomy and Physiology 1, so first it's important to understand what is anatomy, what is physiology, okay? So anatomy is going to be the study of structures, so the study of like where things are found, where organs are found, where different structures within the organs are found. So that is what in the semester we concentrate on, mostly for the lab practical exams. And then for the lecture exams, we concentrate a bit more on physiology. Okay, so physiology is how things actually work. Okay, so that'll be so in A&P2 you'll learn about how the heart pumps blood throughout the body, for example. Okay, how the kidneys filter our blood and create urine. Okay, for A&P1 we'll learn about how the brain works toward the end of the semester, things like that. So physiology is how those things actually work. Okay, so we have different levels of organization. So this is just how things kind of build up into an organism. So a human, this is human anatomy and physiology, okay? So first we have our chemical level. So our first level of organization would be an atom, okay? So this is things like you find on the periodic table of elements, okay? So carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, okay? And those are atoms that are commonly found within the body, okay? So I'll talk a lot about those different atoms in different molecules that we talk about throughout this semester and throughout next semester as well, okay? So atoms, this is like the smallest level of organization, okay? Those come together into, first they come together into molecules. So say we take the atoms, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, we would get something like, we would get water, okay, H2O. So water is very important within our body, and it's found, or it's used within lots of different processes within the body, okay? So molecules, so atoms come together to make molecules, okay? Molecules come together to make cells, okay? So we're made up of lots and lots of different cells, okay? And we have different types of cells within the body, okay? So we'll learn about, for example, in the next unit, we're gonna learn about epithelial tissue versus connective tissue. So those cells work a little bit differently from each other. Then we also have skeletal tissue. So those cells work a little bit differently, okay? And then nervous tissue, like in the brain and in the spinal cord, okay? And in the nerves. So that tissue works a little bit different. So molecules come together to make cells, which make, like I just mentioned, tissues. Okay, so those are all the tissues I just mentioned. So epithelial tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, skeletal tissue, okay? And we have those throughout the body. So for example, in our different organs, like our stomach, right? Our stomach has epithelial tissue around the outside, but then it also has a few layers of skeletal tissue, okay? So it has those 2 different types of tissue. So we'll get a bit more into that when we go into tissues. But our next level then would be organs, okay? So tissues come together to make organs, okay? And again, that would be like the stomach, the heart, the liver, the kidney, all of our different organs. Skin is an organ, bones, so organs, okay? Those come together to make organ systems, okay? So like the digestive system, okay? So the digestive system is made up of lots of different organs, like I just mentioned, the stomach, the esophagus, the liver, the pancreas is involved, the intestines, of course, okay? So lots of different organs come together to make up the digestive system, okay? And then organ systems working together make an organism, okay? So 7 is organism. Okay, so again, this is like a human, for example, okay? Or it can be an animal or any sort of living thing, okay? although we have more advanced organ systems than like a worm, for example, right? So these are our levels of structural organization within the body, okay? All right, so we have 11 different organ systems in the body, okay? So let's go through those, and you just need to know the basics of these. So you need to know the 11 different systems, okay, and their basic function, maybe some of the organs involved, okay. So there's not really a given order, but I'm going to go in the order that we learned them in A&P 1 and then A&P 2, okay. So let me try to erase this quickly first. Okay. All right, so we have first the integumentary system. So I'm gonna number them, but again, there's no like real order. All of them work together to help our body to maintain homeostasis, which we'll talk about soon, okay? So integumentary system. This is our skin, hair, and nails as well. Okay, so skin, hair, and nails. And this includes the glands like oil and sweat glands that we find on the skin as well. Okay, so lots of different functions of the integumentary system. So to protect our body, right? So it's found on the outside to protect our body, to help us maintain an optimal temperature, synthesis of vitamin D, so making vitamin D, some elimination of waste through our sweat, and then sensory information as well. So we have touch, pain, and pressure receptors within the skin, okay? And then there's also a layer of fat underneath the skin, so it also helps to insulate our body, okay? Then we have the skeletal system. So this would be our bones, okay? So this is for support of the body, of course, right? It helps us to be able to move, right? So our muscles pull on our bones to help us move, okay? And it's also going to be our joints and their cartilages as well, which help us to move in different ways, okay? It also helps to protect our internal organs, right? We have ribs that help to protect our lungs and our heart, right? The sternum right here helps to protect our heart as well. The bones in our cranium help to protect our brain, right? Our vertebrae helps to protect our spinal cord. So a lot of these bones are for protection as well, but like the bones in our arm, for example, are more so for movement, right? In our limbs, right? Our arms and our legs, okay? Skeletal system also is for calcium, okay? So calcium helps to make up our bones, and we can break them down if we need blood calcium, okay? Again, we'll learn about all this stuff a lot more when we get to that system. Okay, 3, we have the muscular system or muscle system. So this will be our muscles, okay? Muscular system. So this includes skeletal muscle, which helps us to move, but also smooth muscle, which is found surrounding a lot of our organs and helps to move our organs. So like I said, there's muscle, smooth muscle surrounding our stomach, okay? And that helps our stomach to churn food up to help it digest better, okay? So muscular. So body movement, it helps us to maintain our posture as well. So our muscles are always working to help us to maintain some sort of posture so that we don't fall over, for example, right? Or hunch over all the time. So it helps us to maintain like a standing position or a sitting upright position, okay? And they produce some heat as well, okay? Then finally for A&P1, this is the last system we'll learn about for A&P1, the nervous system, okay? Nervous system. So this is the brain and spinal cord, as well as the nerves that come off of the spinal cord, and our special sense organs, okay? So this would be like the eyes, ears, sense of smell as well, is through the nervous system, okay? So the nervous system generates nerve impulses, and it helps to regulate all of the body's activities, okay? So it tells me to move, right? When I'm writing something on the board, it tells my arm and hand to move in order to write that down, right? So it kind of controls almost everything in the body, okay? So nervous system. Then when you get to A&P2, you're gonna start out with the endocrine system. So this is the hormone system of the body. Okay, endocrine. Perfect. Okay. So this is made up of glands that produce hormones and cells. So like the hypothalamus in the brain is part of the endocrine system and also part of the nervous system, right? The pituitary gland, pineal gland, those are also found in the brain. The thymus gland, thyroid gland, etc. Okay, again, you don't need to know all of these glands, just understand in general what the endocrine system does. So it helps our body also to maintain homeostasis, similar to the nervous system, but kind of more slowly through hormones, okay, whereas the nervous system is more quick, okay? So it helps us to maintain homeostasis via release of those hormones, okay? Then we have the cardiovascular system, okay? So this is going to be our cardio, like heart, vascular, like our blood vessels, and we'll also talk about blood in this unit as well in A&P2. Okay, so heart, blood vessels, and blood. So again, the heart pumps blood throughout the body. The blood carries oxygen, so it brings oxygen and nutrients to our tissues. Okay, so of course that's another very important body system there. Okay, it also, from the tissues, takes away carbon dioxide and waste, brings it to the lungs for carbon dioxide to be expelled. Okay, so it kind of works with the respiratory system as well. A lot of our systems work together. Okay, the blood also contains white blood cells, so it does help to fight against disease as well. Okay, next we have the lymphatic and immune system. Lymphatic and immune. So immune also would include those white blood cells found within the blood. Lymph is a fluid that's found surrounding our tissues. Okay. The lymphatic system also includes the spleen, the thymus, lymph nodes. Our tonsils are part of the immune system, and then our immune cells like B cells and T cells. Okay, so the lymphatic system helps to filter our blood to help clear out any sort of foreign material like pathogens, bacteria, anything that could potentially harm us. Okay, then we have the respiratory system. Okay, so that's going to be our breathing, right? So our lungs, our pharynx, our larynx, trachea, and then bronchial tubes that go into the lungs, okay? So of course, respiratory system function is to take in oxygen, transfers the oxygen to the blood, and also from the blood it gets that carbon dioxide, right? So it's also to release some waste, okay? The respiratory system is also for producing sounds through the voice box or larynx, okay? Then we have the digestive system. Okay, so this is our gastrointestinal tract. So there's lots of different organs there. I'll name a few, right? I already named them: the stomach, the liver, the pancreas, the intestines, the esophagus. So all of these are part of the digestive system. Okay. So digestive system is for the mechanical and chemical breakdown of food. So mechanical breakdown is like chewing the food, right? Getting it into smaller pieces. Or when the stomach kind of turns the food, right? That's all mechanical digestion. Whereas chemical digestion is what is the stomach mixing the food with, right? Stomach acid, right? And some other enzymes as well. Okay, so there's lots of different enzymes involved to help to break down our food in the stomach and in the small intestine. Okay, and again, you'll learn about that when you get to digestive system in A&P2. Okay, then we have the urinary system. Okay, so this is the kidneys, ureters, bladder, and urethra. Okay, so the kidneys filter our blood to create urine, so the urinary system is to expel waste. Okay, and then we reabsorb anything else that we want to keep within our body. And then finally, we have the reproductive system. Reproductive. Okay, so this includes the gonads, so testes or ovaries, and lots of different accessory organs. Okay, so function of the reproductive system is to produce gametes. So that would be sperm and egg cells. Those can come together and create a zygote, which could form into a baby. Okay, so to pass down our genes, right? That's the main function of the reproductive system. Mammary glands are also included in the reproductive system, and those help to produce milk to sustain a baby early in life. Okay. So now we're going to go through some basic things that you should know, so some biology concepts. So characteristics of life. Okay, we'll start there. So I'm going to erase all these 11 body systems. Okay. So all living things have different characteristics so that we can classify that thing as a living thing. Okay. So these differentiate living things like humans, right, from non-living things, okay? So some life processes in humans include metabolism. Okay, so metabolism is basically converting food into energy, okay? So things that we eat, this is mostly going to be like glucose, can be converted into energy. Okay, so turning food into energy. Okay, so we all have metabolism. Okay, responsiveness. Okay, so if something hurts me, right, I'm going to respond to that pain. Okay, so say someone were to grab me and I'm not expecting it, I'll pull away, right? I can respond to different sorts of stimuli. Right? Or it could be something even that's not super, immediately harmful, like the sun is in my eyes, right? I'm going to squint or close my eyes, or maybe I'll put sunglasses on, right? So I'm responding to that stimulus, okay? So responsiveness. Movement. Okay, so humans are able to move, pretty self-explanatory. Growth. Okay, we're able to grow and develop. Differentiation. So what is differentiation? Okay, and we'll talk about this more so in AMP2 when we get to like blood cells and things like that. But differentiation is going from cells into tissues and organs, or going from like a stem cell to another different type of cell, for example. Okay, and we'll talk about this a bit in the skeletal system as well. Okay, so we'll get a little bit of differentiation there. Okay, so differentiation, right? Being able to develop from cells into tissue. So when a fetus is developing, then they start out as like a little ball of cells, and then they turn into a full human with different organs, right? So those cells differentiate or turn into different tissues. Okay, being made of cells. Okay, so again, like we talked about, we're made up of all different types of cells, like epithelial cells, connective tissue cells, skeletal cells, nervous cells, etc. Reproduction, so ability to reproduce and pass down our genes. Okay, and then a big one that we're going to talk about in more detail now is ability to maintain homeostasis. Okay, so what is homeostasis? Homeostasis is the ability to maintain a sort of like equilibrium within the body, a sort of balance within the body. Okay, so our fluids need to have a certain amount of, acids, bases, salts, right? And it's a very delicate balance, right? We need to also maintain like our body temperature. If we get too cold or too hot, it could be trouble, right? It could lead to even potentially death or sickness or disease. Okay, so homeostasis. So there's lots of different regulatory processes in the body that help us to maintain our homeostasis. So an example that I just gave would be maintaining our body temperature, right? Our body's constantly trying to maintain our temperature within a specific range, okay? So it's kind of like how a thermostat works in your house, right? Say you turn the heat on to 68 degrees, okay? It's gonna turn that heat on, right? If it's lower than 68 degrees in your house, it's gonna turn that heat on until you reach 68 degrees, and then it's gonna turn the heat off. Then it starts to get a little chilly again, right? It goes down to 67. It's gonna turn the heat back on until we get back up to 68. So the body is constantly making those different adjustments as well to maintain our homeostasis in lots of different ways. This would be in like hormone balances, salt balances, lots of different things, right? We need to keep a very delicate balance within our body. Okay, so if there's a disruption, either from something in our external environment, right? Say we go out into the cold and we're not properly prepared, right? Or from the internal environment, so something is going wrong inside, we have some sort of disease that gives us a hormone imbalance, okay? Then it could lead to homeostatic imbalances, right? Things going wrong, okay? So an example would be having a temperature, okay? So if we have a 101 degree temperature, for example. So this could be minor, right? You take some Tylenol, your fever goes down and then it goes away within a few hours, okay? Or it could be very dangerous. You have a high fever, like let's say of 103, where you need to go to the emergency room, and it doesn't go down, right? Or eventually they get it to go down, okay? Or it could even lead to death, right? If you have a temperature for a prolonged period of time, it affects your organs, and it could potentially lead to death if you don't get it taken care of, okay? So all of our body systems will work together to maintain our homeostasis, okay? And they'll do this via positive and negative feedback, okay? So negative feedback, this is our most common feedback system. So it's something turning on and off constantly, like that thermostat in our house, right? So this would be like temperature regulation. Most things in our body work off of negative feedback. They turn something on, like a hormone, then when we have enough of that hormone, it's turned off until we need more again, okay? So negative feedback. Positive feedback, this is less common within the body. So this is like something is turned on and it keeps producing more, like of a hormone, for example, until an event happens. Okay, so this would be like childbirth. So this would be like childbirth. When the uterus is contracting, it's caused by a hormone known as oxytocin. Okay, so oxytocin is sent to the uterus and causes it to contract more and more and more until the baby is born. Okay, and then it will eventually shut off. Okay, or blood clotting is another example of a positive feedback system. So you'll learn about this in A&P too, but more and more proteins are sent to the site of the tear of the blood vessel until it is fully repaired, okay, or until that blood clot forms and then it can repair itself, okay. So make sure you know the difference between positive and negative feedback. Okay, so that was just a bit of review. Now we're going to get into some anatomical terms that you should know that'll make your life a lot easier moving through the rest of this semester and next semester as well. Okay, so first let's talk about the anatomical position. So there's a specific way that the body is situated that makes it easier for like nurses and doctors and anyone working with bodies, animals as well, to understand kind of what's going on, okay? So it's just like a universal way to understand, like, this is the position we're talking about, okay? And I said animals, I'm talking about that mostly for like different like cuts and things, but for anatomical position, we're talking about humans. So it's standing with the palms facing outward, what we call anteriorly toward the belly, okay? So facing outward, feet facing outward as well, and standing in an upright position. So this will be anatomical position, okay? So when I talk about things throughout this semester, you can assume I'm talking about something in anatomical position unless otherwise stated, okay? One thing I want to note, so when you're looking at me, for example, right? If you're facing me, my left side is your right side, right? So you always have to think about things as anatomically left or right, okay? So if on a lab practical exam you have to differentiate left or right of something, you need to think, if I'm looking at this subject, their left is my right and their right is my left, okay? So make sure you keep that in mind, because that's something that some students mix up, and it's something kind of easy to not think about and mix up, okay? So anatomical left and right, okay? So we have 4 quadrants that divide the abdominal cavity, okay? So that's our abdomen, so below the diaphragm and before we get to the pelvis, so like this area here, okay, between my hands. So the quadrants are easy. It divides it into 4, right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, and left lower quadrant, okay? So it's just an easy way to divide the abdomen into 4 quadrants. We can also divide the abdominal pelvic cavity, which includes the pelvis area where we would have our lower intestines and our bladder, right, and our reproductive organs as well, okay? So this divides into 9 regions. So I'm going to draw those up here and we'll name them all, okay? All right. Okay. So let's draw this out. Okay, so 9 different regions. Again, this would be, if I'm facing someone, this is the anatomical right, this is the anatomical left, and then this would be the center here, okay? So let's do the center first, okay? So this region here would be the epigastric. Okay, epigastric region. Okay, then in the middle, this would be where our belly button is. So I'll draw a little belly button here. This would be the umbilical region, because we have that belly button there where our umbilical cord used to be. Okay, so this here is the umbilical region. Okay, and then this lower region here is the hypogastric. Hypo is like under. Okay. Now, where's our stomach, right? Our stomach's like right here, okay? So epigastric would be like above the stomach, hypogastric like below the stomach, okay? And then umbilical, where our umbilical cord is, okay? All right, okay. So left and right are named the same, but on a practical exam, make sure you specify left versus right. So the upper left is the left hypochondriac region. Left hypochondriac. And then right, same thing, but it's the right hypochondriac region. Chondriac. Okay. Hypo again meaning underneath. Chondriac meaning, it means underneath the ribs basically. Okay, so our ribs are connected to our sternum via connective tissue. Connective tissue has these cells in it called chondrocytes. So this means like underneath the ribs, okay? So remember, the abdominal region starts right underneath the ribs, underneath the diaphragm, okay? So the left and right hypochondriac, right underneath the ribs, okay? Then in the middle here, this would actually be like where our lower back is, our lumbar region. So this is the left lumbar, and this is the right lumbar region. Okay, left lumbar, right lumbar. Okay, and then finally we have the iliac region. So here, left iliac and right iliac region. Okay, perfect. So this is how we divide our abdominal pelvic area into these regions. Okay, so on a lab practical, make sure you read the question at each station. If I'm asking you for a quadrant, it's right upper, right lower, left lower. But if I'm asking you for a region, it's one of these 9 regions. Okay, so make sure you read that so that you know or understand what I'm asking about. Okay. Okay. Now we're going to get into our directional terms. Okay, so this is how we can relate different things in the body to each other. Okay, all right. So quite a few of these are kind of self-explanatory. It's in the name, right? Superior, like if you're superior to someone, you're above them, right? So superior is toward the head or upper part of a structure. Okay, inferior, if you're inferior, you're like below, right? So inferior is away from the head or beneath something else, okay? So I can say, right, my intestines are inferior to my heart, right? They're below. Or I can say my heart is superior to my intestines, right? It's above, okay? Or if I'm saying superior, it could mean also just toward the head or inferior away from the head, okay? Other directional terms, cephalic or cranial means toward the head of something. So for me, it'd be going up toward my head. For a four-legged animal, it'd be going toward their head, right, away from their tail. Caudal is toward the tail, and for me, it'd be going down like toward the tailbone region. Anterior is toward the front of the body, okay? And ventral also, it means belly side. Okay, so for me, it's the same. Anterior and ventral are all this side, my belly side or my front side. For a four-legged animal, ventral, right, if they're standing on all fours, their belly is underneath. Okay, so ventral would be underneath, but anterior would be like on a cat, it would be like its face, chest, and front paws. Okay, so make sure you know the differentiation of that. And then posterior and dorsal, same thing. So posterior is toward the back. And then dorsal is wherever the back is, like wherever the vertebrae is on the animal. Okay. So for me, dorsal and posterior is all the entire backside. But for a four-legged animal, posterior for the cat, right, would be like its tail and its hind legs. But dorsal would be the top of the cat, right, where its back is. Okay, so make sure you understand the difference of anterior versus ventral and posterior versus dorsal, okay, on a two-legged animal like a human or a four-legged animal, okay. Okay, medial means like toward the middle, so it's toward the midline. This would be the midline of my body, right, if I were to divide it in half here, okay, so toward the midline, okay. So I can say my sternum is medial to my shoulder, right? It's more on the medial side of my body. Lateral is away from the midline, okay? So my arm is lateral to my sternum, okay? So it's more away from the midline. Proximal is closer to the attached end of the limb. Okay, so like this would be proximal, or like my groin area where my leg attaches to my trunk would be proximal, or it could just mean close to something, right, like in proximity to. Okay, so I can also say like my sternum is proximal to my heart, right, they're right near each other. Distal is further from the attached limb, so I could say like my fingers are distal, right, or my feet are distal, or just distant, right, further away from something. Okay, so I could say my feet are distal from my sternum, right? Intermediate, this means between two structures, okay? So our colon, we have a ascending, transverse, and descending. So I could say my transverse colon is intermediate to my ascending and descending colon, right? It's in between. Ipsilateral means on the same side of the body, right? So my left arm and my left leg are ipsilateral, and contralateral means on the opposite side of the body. So I could say my left arm and my right arm are contralateral, but it could be anything on different sides of the body, okay? Like my stomach and my appendix, right? Those are also contralateral. They're on different sides of the body. Superficial means toward the surface of the body. So I could say my skin is superficial to my stomach, right? It's more on the outside of the body, okay? Or I can say like the epithelial covering of my stomach is superficial to the acid within my stomach, right? It's more on the outside. It doesn't have to be necessarily on the outside of the body. Deep means away from the surface of the body, okay? So I could say my stomach is deep to my sternum, right? It's deeper inside my body than my sternum bone, okay? Okay. Some different membranes and areas you need to know of the body. Serous membranes. So these are thin tissues that cover the organs within our body, okay? And they have two layers. So they have a visceral layer, which is connected to the organ, and a parietal layer, which is outside of that layer. And in between, there is a fluid that helps to reduce friction between organs touching each other, right? Our organs are very packed within our body, okay? So the heart, for example, has a specific covering called the pericardium. Okay, so it has fluid in between the pericardium and between the visceral and the parietal layer, and that helps to reduce friction so that when the heart pumps, it's not, we don't feel pain of it rubbing up against anything else within the body. The lungs have what's known as a pleura, so I'm gonna draw a very basic lungs here. Okay. And then surrounding the lungs, we'll have two layers, this pleura, right? So this one would be like the visceral pleura directly connected to the lungs here, okay? And then we would have a parietal pleura here, and then we'd have fluid in between, okay? So you'd have fluid in between, pleural fluid, that helps to reduce friction when we breathe in and expand the lungs and when we breathe out. Okay, this area here in between the lungs, this has a specific name. This is where the heart sits. Okay, so we have our heart here. This is known as the mediastinum. Okay, mediastinum. So that's where the heart sits between the lungs. Okay, so again, pericardium is the sac that covers the heart, and the mediastinum is the space within the body where the heart sits. Okay. And then peritoneum, this is specifically the serous membrane that lines the abdominal cavity, okay? And it covers all of its organs. Okay, now we're gonna go over our different planes, and these are ways that you can like cut when you're doing a dissection as well, or that you can kind of divide the body, okay? So a sagittal plane is cutting something into left and right parts. Okay, so if you were to like cut my arm off right here, you're cutting me into technically a left and a right part. Okay, it doesn't have to be right in the middle. If it is right in the middle, right, if you were to do a cut this way, right down the center or the midline of the body, that would be known as a mid-sagittal plane or cut. Okay, right in the middle, right, mid-sagittal. So again, sagittal, and cutting anything into like an organ or a whole organism into left and right parts. Okay, mid-sagittal is going right down the middle into left and right parts. Okay, coronal or frontal cut is cutting into anterior and posterior parts. Okay, so cutting this way. Okay, and again, it doesn't need to be right down the middle. And then transverse cut is cutting into superior and inferior parts. So it's like how a magician cuts someone open. Okay, cuts open their assistant. Okay, transverse cut. Okay, if you were to like cut off one of my legs, that would also be a transverse cut. Again, it doesn't need to be like right in the middle or anything like that. And then finally, an oblique cut is any other sort of cut. So you'll hear the word oblique a lot when we go through like muscles and in a few other different situations. But oblique means like diagonal. Okay, so oblique is any other sort of cut that doesn't follow those other three planes. Okay. Body cavities. So we have different body cavities. So these are spaces within the body that help to protect and separate our different internal organs. Okay. So two large cavities that we have would be the dorsal cavity. So dorsal again means in the back, right? So this is our cranial cavity and our vertebral cavity. Okay, and those are two separate cavities as well. So we have the cranial cavity, which is the space that holds our brain, and then the vertebral cavity, which is in between our vertebrae, and it's the space where the spinal cord runs through. Dorsal cavity is both of those together, so everything in the back, right? The cranial and the vertebral cavity. The ventral cavity is in the front. So it includes 3 different cavities. The thoracic, which is above the diaphragm, so our chest area, which holds our lungs and our heart. And the abdominal cavity, which is below the diaphragm and holds all of a lot of our digestive organs. And then our pelvic cavity, okay, which is where our pelvis starts right here, like in the hips, okay? And that holds like our bladder and reproductive organs and some of the intestines as well, okay? You can put together the abdominal pelvic cavity, right? Like when we talked about dividing the body into those 9 regions, that was dividing up the abdominal pelvic cavity together, okay? So that's all one cavity as well, okay? Okay. 2 other things you should know is axial versus appendicular. Okay, so axial is relating to like the axis of the body, like the center of the body. So this will be like our head, neck, and the trunk of our body. Okay, so it'd be like our vertebrae and our ribs. Okay, appendicular are like the appendages and the attachments of the appendages to the trunk. So it'd be everything in our arms, hands, fingers, legs, feet, and toes. And then also our coxal bones, so our 2 hip bones here, which attach the legs to the trunk, and the shoulder girdle, which are the clavicle bones, and the scapula bones, which help to attach the arms to the trunk. Okay, so axial, appendicular. Okay. Finally, for this video, I'm going to go through some anatomical terms that you need to know that describe different parts of the body, okay? All right, so cephalic, this includes the entire head, okay? And this is different than cranial. So cranial would be like this area here, again, the part that holds the brain specifically. Frontal, we're talking about just the forehead. Okay, frontal is just the forehead, like where our frontal bone is or our frontal lobe of our brain. So frontal is just forehead. Okay, facial is just the face. So let's say from the eyebrows down to the chin. This would be the facial area. Okay, orbital. So the sockets where our eyes are in are the orbits. So orbital would be like the eye sockets. And ocular would be like the actual eyes themselves. Okay, like oculus, right? Ocular means eye. Mental, specifically, this one's a little confusing, right? Because you think mental something like more up in the brain area, but this is actually the chin, okay? So when we get to skeletal system, okay, in the next unit, there's these 2 little openings on the chin. Those are known as the mental foramen. So mental means chin, okay? Buccal, this means cheeks. Buccal means cheeks. Oral, like the oral cavity, that means the mouth, okay? And nasal, I think everyone knows what that means. Nasal means nose, okay? So some of these you kind of know. If I can think of anything for you to remember these things, I will tell you, okay? Occipital, this is like the back underneath of the head, like right here. This is where the occipital bone is, and the occipital lobe of the brain as well, okay? Otic, this means ear, so otic means ear. Cervical, this actually means neck. There's also, of course, a cervix, which is the entrance to the uterus, but cervical, like the cervical vertebrae, are within the neck, okay? So cervical means neck. Acromial is like the point of the shoulder here, acromial, okay? Part of the scapula bone is known as the acromion, and it's in this like point of the shoulder area here. So acromial means shoulder. Mammary, like the mammary glands, those are found in the breast. So mammary means breast. Thoracic, this means the entire chest area, okay? So down to where the diaphragm is, okay? Sternal, this is where our sternum is, so the breastbone area, okay? And abdominal is the abdominal area, right? So below the diaphragm and above the pelvis. So this whole area here would be the abdominal area, okay? Coxal means hips. Remember, these 2 bones here are the coxal bones. So coxal means hips. Umbilical, this is specifically the navel, like this area here, where our umbilical cord is, so where our belly button is. Okay, so it's like a specific portion of the abdominal area, the umbilical area. Inguinal, this is the groin area. So the groin is where the legs attach to the trunk, okay? So inguinal, okay, that area there. Pelvic, this would be like where the pelvis is. So this here would be like the pelvic area, okay? Pubic, that would be the pubic area. So that would be the genital area. Perineal, this is the area between the anus and the external genitalia. So it's a small little area between the anus and the external genitalia. Vertebral, this would be where our vertebrae or our spine is. So it's like the spinal column area. Sacral, so there's a bone behind the coxal bones known as the sacrum, and it's where the coccyx or the tailbone hangs off of. So it's like between the hips, sacral. Lumbar, this is the lower back, so it's between the ribs and the hips. So specifically like this area here would be the lumbar area. Dorsum, like dorsal, right? This is the entire back area, okay? Gluteal, like the glutes, so that's the buttocks. Scapular, this is where our scapula bone is. You can feel it in the back there. So if you kind of go like that, you can feel the scapula, okay? So it's like the shoulder blade area. Axillary is the armpit. So I always think of Axe body spray. So axillary is the armpit area. Brachial, this refers to either the whole arm, but it usually more specifically refers to the upper arm, okay? Brachial, upper arm. Antebrachial is like kind of in front of the arm, but it specifically refers to the forearm. Okay, so this whole area here is the forearm. Okay, so the front portion of the lower arm. Olecranal, this means the elbow. Okay, we have part of the ulna is the olecranon. And then in the humerus, we have the olecranon fossa, where that fits into, and that makes up the elbow. Okay, so olecranal means elbow. Antecubital is like the front of the elbow. Okay, antecubital, so it's specifically like this area between my fingers here. Carpal, the wrist, so you can think of like carpal tunnel syndrome. Okay, carpal is the wrist. Palmar, specifically the palm of the hand. That one's self-explanatory. Manus or manual means like the entire hand. Okay, so the entire hand. If any of you know Spanish, mano, right, means hand. So manus or manual means hand. Or if you do something manually, right, you do it by hand. So you can remember it that way as well. Pollex is thumb. Okay, so I always think of like pollen, like you have a green thumb, pollen, pollex. Okay, so pollex is specifically the thumbs. Digital means any of the other fingers or the toes. Okay, so digital is, or digits are the general term for fingers and toes. But on the practical, if I point to the thumb, I want the specific name for pollex. If I point to any of the other fingers or toes, then you can say digital. The big toe also has a specific name, just like the thumb. So the big toe is known as hallux. Okay, pollex, hallux. Okay. Pedal, this means the entire foot. And so if I point to like the entire foot, like the top of the foot, it would be pedal. The sole of the foot or the bottom of the foot is known as plantar. So I think of like I plant my feet into the ground, I'm using the soles or bottom of my feet, right? I'm pushing them into the ground. So plantar, sole of the feet, pedal is the entire foot. Patellar is the knee, like the patella is the knee bone. Popliteal is the back of the knee. So this area where the leg bends, popliteal. Okay, then there's two other words that sound very close to each other. Crural, this is the leg, usually like the entire lower leg. And sural is specifically the calf. So this back area here, like that big muscle area. Femoral is thigh, where our femur bone is. Okay, and fibular or perineal is specifically the side of the leg. So the lateral bone in the lower leg is known as the fibula. So fibular is like the side of the leg. Okay, tarsal is specifically the ankle of the foot, and calcaneal, the heel of the foot. So the large bone that makes up the heel of the foot is the calcaneus bone. So these terms will help you when you're learning the different bone names as well. Okay. All right, I'm going to do the rest in part 2.